This should finally make you look like you belong at this table. Sebastian Ashby, 41-year-old husband of Corinne Ashby, set a tall white gift box in front of her and smiled at the room like a man doing his wife a generous favor before a crowd of witnesses. Corinne Ashby, 37-year-old wife of Sebastian and founder of Versailles, the most sought-after luxury crystal house in the country, looked at the box without touching it. Around them, the ballroom of the Aldgate Grand Hotel burned under 300 candles. This was their 10th anniversary gala. Charity donors filled every seat. Lawrence Ashby, 65-year-old father of Sebastian and Corinne's father-in-law, stood near the bar surrounded by people he'd spent 2 decades trying to impress. Simone Draper, 32-year-old personal consultant and Sebastian's secret lover, sat 2 tables away in a dress the color of crushed orchids, watching Corinne with the patient calm of a woman who already knew how the evening would end. The box sat between Sebastian's confidence and Corinne's silence. Her fingers rested on the edge of her chair. She already knew something was wrong. The embossed seal on the lid wasn't centered. The ribbon was tied in a knot she had never approved for retail packaging. The box came from a reseller, not a boutique. She kept her face still and let him speak. "Open it," Sebastian said. She lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in cream tissue, sat a crystal vase, long-necked, hand-cut facets, the kind of piece that caught candlelight and fractured it into a dozen small fires across the tablecloth. It came with a card bearing Versailles' name, a serial number, and a gold authentication seal. Lawrence walked over as if he had been waiting for the cue. "Now that," he said, loud enough for the nearest 3 tables, "is Versailles. Real craftsmanship. Some of us know what real luxury looks like." He glanced at the thin gold chain Corinne always wore, her mother's chain, and smiled the way a man smiles when he believes he is being gracious. Corinne touched the vase. The weight was wrong. The facets were close, but the cutting angle was off by a degree only a glassmaker would notice. The base was too light. The crystal sang at the wrong pitch when she touched the rim. Versailles had not made this vase. She had founded Versailles 12 years ago in a rented studio, with second-generation glass-blowing tools and her mother's notebooks. She had grown it from a boutique craft house into the luxury brand that now supplied private collectors, 5-star hotels, and the estates of people who did not say Versailles' name at dinner parties. Because they owned the pieces, not because they were trying to impress someone. She knew every product they had ever produced, because she had approved every design herself. This was not one of them. Sebastian raised his glass. "While everyone's here, I want to say something." He paused. The practiced pause of a man who had rehearsed this. "Corinne and I have spent 10 years building separate lives. I think we both know it's time to stop pretending." His voice dipped into something that sounded almost regretful. "I'm asking for a formal separation." The table went still. One guest looked down at her plate. Another coughed softly. Lawrence looked satisfied, the way a man looks when a plan unfolds exactly as discussed. Simone pressed her lips together and hid her smile behind her champagne glass, but not quite well enough. Corinne looked at the vase, then at Sebastian. Then she said, quietly, without any tremor at all, "Before I respond, I'd like to have this authenticated." Sebastian laughed, short, dismissive, "If that makes you feel better." Lawrence turned to a nearby guest and murmured something about sensitivity. From across the room, a man in a navy jacket stood slowly and set down the auction catalogue he had been reviewing. Alistair Novak, 55-year-old senior authentication director for Versailles, walked toward the table with his hands in his jacket pockets and introduced himself as the consulting appraiser for the evening's charity auction items. No one questioned it. Corinne had placed the call 2 days earlier. She had known something was building since October. The first sign had been a hotel charge on a shared card, a boutique hotel 2 blocks from Simone Draper's office, that Sebastian explained as a client dinner. Corinne had noted it and said nothing. The second sign was a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She had been working late in her home office when Sebastian appeared in the doorway to say goodnight. He hadn't noticed the window behind him reflected her screen, and she had watched him step away and immediately put his phone to his ear, his whole posture changing into someone she didn't recognize. The third sign was a vendor receipt that passed through Versailles' corporate accounting office by mistake. A boutique reseller had billed the purchase of a Versailles-style crystal vase to a personal account. The word style had stopped her cold. Style meant it wasn't Versailles. She had called Blythe Holloway, 48-year-old attorney and Corinne's private legal counsel, the same afternoon. Blythe had handled Corinne's premarital agreements, her company trusts, and every legal structure keeping Versailles' ownership separate from the Ashby family name. She was one of very few people who knew that the company's founder and the woman Lawrence called my son's quiet wife were the same person. "Don't confront him yet," Blythe had said. "Let him choose the stage." Corinne had waited. She had also quietly reviewed a file that had been sitting on her legal team's desk for 3 weeks. Versen's risk division had flagged an unusual pattern. 3 separate lenders had submitted verification requests for luxury assets listed in documentation connected to Ashby Properties, Lawrence's development company. All 3 requests listed Versen pieces as part of the asset portfolio. None of the serial numbers matched any piece Versen had ever sold to Lawrence Ashby or to any company in his name. Corinne had ordered a quiet review, no contact with Lawrence, no alert to Sebastian. She had arrived at the anniversary gala with all of it already sealed in a folder in Blythe's briefcase. Alistair placed the vase on a white inspection cloth and worked without theatre, loop, calibration tool, tablet running Versen's authentication database. The room watched him the way a room watches a doctor. Asked to examine something it cannot name. Sebastian shifted his weight. "This is unnecessary." "Quick process," Alistair said without looking up. Lawrence set his glass down. "My son purchased that from a reputable dealer." "Then the authentication will reflect that," Alistair said, still not looking up. The silence stretched. When Alistair finally spoke, his voice was measured and clear and filled the nearest 20 feet of ballroom without effort. "This piece was not produced by Versen." Sebastian stared. "What?" "The crystal composition, cutting geometry, base weight, and internal marker are all inconsistent with Versen's manufacturing standards." Alistair set down the loop. "The certificate uses an authentication format Versen retired in 2019. The serial number exists in our records, but it belongs to a small private commission bowl, not a vase of this design." A sound moved through the nearest tables. Not loud, the sound of people recalculating. "You're saying my son was sold a fake?" Lawrence said. "I'm saying this piece is a replica," Alistair replied, "sold with forged documentation." Sebastian turned to Corinne. "I didn't know. I was sold something I didn't know." "Who sold it to you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Across the room, Simone's hand had moved to her clutch. That small instinctive movement told Corinne more than Sebastian's silence. Alistair held the certificate under the light again. His expression shifted from appraisal into something sharper, recognition. "Madame Ashby." He used the title the way he only used it in private. "This forged certificate format matches 2 documents our risk team received last month. Both were submitted to lenders as part of asset verification packages." He paused. Both packages listed Ashby Properties as the owning entity. Blythe stepped closer to the table. Lawrence's face changed the way weather changes over a flat landscape, the pride pulling back, something raw appearing underneath. The room was very still. Corinne said nothing. She looked at the vase, the careful, convincing replica of something her mother had helped her design above a garage in 2013, and she thought about every dinner where Lawrence had said Versen's name like a password, a door into rooms he believed he deserved. She thought of how many times he had glanced at her mother's chain with that pleasant, condescending smile. He had spent years trying to reach Versen. He had never once looked at the woman who owned it. Blythe moved Sebastian to the far wall with 2 sentences and an open legal folder. Corinne walked with Alistair to a small room off the main hall. Odette, her senior assistant, was already there with a tablet and a sealed evidence pouch. Alistair placed the vase and the certificate into separate sleeves and labeled each one with his name, the time, and a case number. He did it with the unhurried precision of someone who knew a single missed step could let a lie survive in a courtroom. Blythe came in 12 minutes later. "Sebastian says the dealer was recommended by a business contact," she said. "He claims he didn't know the piece was forged." She set a folder on the table. "The records will tell us whether Lawrence was the contact." Outside the door, Lawrence's voice rose in the hallway. "Slander, family reputation." The words moved through the wall like something trying to find a surface that would hold them. Corinne listened and thought about a dinner from 3 years ago. Lawrence had told the table that Versen represented genuine cultural heritage, that only people with real aesthetic literacy could appreciate what the company stood for. Then he had looked at her mother's chain and said, in that light, pleasant way he had mastered, that not everyone had that kind of exposure growing up. She had touched her mother's chain under the table and said nothing. Adele Rue had taught herself glassblowing from library books and second-hand equipment. She had worked in a studio the size of a large closet and sold pieces at local craft markets for 12 years before illness slowed her hands. She never saw what her daughter built from her techniques and notebooks and eye for light. She died 3 months before Versen made its first major sale. Real value, Adele had always said, doesn't need an audience to be real. Corinne had kept that sentence for 12 years. It was why Versen's ownership was held through a private trust under her maiden name, Rue. It was why she attended industry events as a creative director and never announced herself as founder. It was why Sebastian had known for 9 years that his wife worked in luxury design and had never once asked what her name was on the ownership documents. He had never cared enough to ask. By morning, the lenders had been notified. Versen's risk division delivered 3 verified reports to Blythe's office. The forged certificates, all bearing Versen's retired format, had been used to inflate the appraised value of 2 luxury asset portfolios held as collateral for a combined credit line of $4 million. The lenders suspended the credit. Ashby Properties unraveled quietly, then quickly. Business partners received legal holds. Suppliers paused contracts pending payment. The name Lawrence Ashby, which had carried such particular weight in certain rooms, began to carry a different kind of weight instead. Sebastian called 7 times in the first 2 days. Corinne let each call go to Blythe. On the 5th day, he came to the Versen offices. Security called her before he reached the lobby. She came down. He looked smaller than he had in the ballroom. He had not shaved. He was holding the separation papers Blythe had sent, the corners wet from the rain. I didn't know about my father, he said. What he was doing with those documents, I didn't know. Corinne looked at him. She believed part of that. That's not what I needed you to know, she said. He frowned. What do you mean? I needed you to know me, she said. You never tried. Sebastian opened his mouth. Nothing came that matched the moment. He had spent 5 days constructing defenses, the pressure of his work, the distance she had let grow, his own loneliness, and none of them fit here, outside a building he had never known owned, in the rain, holding papers that ended a decade. You work for Versen, he said, and it still came out like a question. I founded Versen, she said. Your father spent 10 years trying to get a meeting with me while I was sitting across from him at your family's dinner table. He was quiet for a long time. She could see him reassembling the past 9 years against new information, watching things he had not understood rearrange themselves. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. She thought about the first year of their marriage. She had come close more than once. But each time, something stopped her. A joke he made about women who led with their portfolios. A comment that successful wives made men feel like employees. The easy laugh he gave when his father called her charmingly unambitious. So she had waited, told herself that love would grow first, that he would choose her before he needed to know what she was worth. He never did. Because I wanted you to choose me before you knew what I owned, she said. You didn't. He looked at the papers in his hands. I still love you, he said. She let herself feel the weight of that. The truth and the lie of it wound together. You love what you're losing, she said. That's not the same thing. She stepped back inside. The glass doors closed between them. Through them she could see Sebastian still standing on the pavement, looking at the building with an expression she recognized as the beginning of understanding, arriving, as it always does for men like him too late to matter. 6 months later, Versen released a new collection. It was called Adele. 18 pieces, each designed after sketches from her mother's notebooks, translated into crystal using the same proportion Adele Rue had developed in her garage studio. The pieces were quiet. They did not chase attention. They held light, the way her mother had always described good design holding light. Not by trapping it, but by giving it somewhere beautiful to rest. The night of the launch, Corinne walked through the gallery alone before the guests arrived. At the center of the room was a reproduction of her mother's first finished piece, a small bowl with uneven walls and a faint amber tint that no commercial process had ever exactly replicated. It sat beneath a single light. It was, by every technical measure, imperfect. It was the most beautiful thing in the room. When she stepped in front of the guests, she spoke without notes. My mother made things with her hands because she believed objects could hold what words couldn't reach, she said. She never saw the company we built from her work. This collection is for her, and for every woman who was told her quietness was smallness. It was never smallness. It was patience. It was precision. It was knowing exactly how much strength it takes to hold your ground without making noise. She announced that 20% of proceeds from the Adele collection would fund legal counsel for women navigating financial fraud within marriage. coercive control, forged assets, economic isolation. The room was still for a moment. Then someone near the back began to applaud, and by the time it reached the front it was full. Lawrence Ashby's credit line remained frozen. Sebastian's name appeared in 3 pending filings and had quietly left most guest lists in the city. Neither of them attended. Corinne looked at the crystal pieces catching the gallery light, her mother's proportions made permanent in something that would outlast every forged certificate and every man who had confused her silence for surrender. She touched her mother's chain. A reporter asked her the following week what she hoped people would take from the collection. She thought for a moment before answering. "I want them to remember," she said, "that the most powerful thing in a room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the thing that was there the whole time, holding the light, waiting to be seen." She meant the crystal. She meant her mother. She meant herself.